We are the weirdos, mister.
Welcome to the Final Ghouls of Horror. I am Jeremy.
I'm Holly.
And I'm El.
We're three people who love horror and are coming at it from different perspectives of who we are. Each week we'll be looking at a different film, project, or the like from these perspectives. Sometimes we might explore a film that we've all seen and love. Sometimes it might be one that just one or even none of us have seen. We all have different things we love, and let's just say love less in horror. And so it'll make for an interesting set of conversations, hopefully. So, yeah, this is something that we've been wanting to do for, God, how long? I don't even know.
Geez, it was because it was after I started doing stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I want to say 2 years.
Oh, God, has it been 2 years?
Oh, probably. Have a look. When did the horror channel get opened?
That is a good question.
Because it'd be close to that.
Because yeah, whole thing sort of started off when we are all players in Final Show films, role playing game streams, and in the Slack at some point a long ass time ago, I was like, hey, we talk about horror a lot in some of the random channels. Why don't we just make a horror channel?
Yeah, that way we don't have to annoy the people who get upset by horror, or just like, geez, you guys talk too much. Shut the hell up.
Exactly. And yet, God, it was early on in that, yeah, that I was like, hey, we should do a
Yeah, it's
podcast.
like
And then,
this would be interesting if we talk about it instead of just writing about it.
yep, because I mean, I'll be honest, I just love talking about the genre. I love talking about film in general, but specifically horror. And then we're like, yeah, that's a great idea. And then it didn't happen.
Well, it continued to be a great idea, and
Yes,
now it's more than an idea; it is actually tangible.
absolutely.
And you dealers have this in your hot little fungible hands.
So yeah, we're all fans of the horror genre in, I would say, varying levels of horror experience.
Just a bit.
Just a little bit, which to me was what makes an interesting way for us to approach this, because we all have, like, we're all very different people. We approach horror from different perspectives based on who we are, how much we've seen, etc. And as such, we have, really, I would imagine, different opinions on what we like and don't like. So, yeah, so for our first episode here, instead of diving right into a film, we're going to tell you a little bit about who we are, our relationship with horror, what we like, what we don't like, and that sort of thing, just to give your dear listeners, a one or seven or however many of us there might be, an understanding of where we're coming from when we approach those movies.
Well, if you can honestly claim to be our first listener, you'll be our favorite.
Yes, absolutely. You will always be our favorite.
Not that we're technically allowed to have favorites, but if we were, which we're not, but if we were,
Oh, fuck that. I'll have favorites.
I always have favorites and I tell them to.
I'm trying to be fair to everyone. But yeah, fair. And honestly, yes.
Yes. So, without further ado, let's get to know us a little bit. And I put together a few questions to sort of facilitate that. And we will start off with nice and general. Who are you exactly? And Elle, why don't you tell us who you are?
Alright, so g'day. Even though that's less of a thing than you think, because Australia. My name's L. It's spelled L, and you'd be surprised at how many people get that wrong. I am, to the
Are
best
you
of my
kidding
knowledge.
me?
Yes, I know people get that wrong.
Wow,
and not even in the expected ways.
that's amazing.
So yeah, I am, as far as I've last checked, Australian. I'm Arrow, I'm Ace, I'm plural, and honestly too old for how old I am, because the world needs to stop in a lot of different ways. But most of my time is spent engaging in capitalism despite my best efforts, and recovering from that time, preferably by sleep, but usually not.
Yep. I'm Jeremy Thomas. I am the head editor, contributor, and film critic for 411mania.com, which is a pop culture site. Largely focused on wrestling, but we do a lot of movies and other stuff too. I am a white cis bisexual Wiccan. I am approaching 50 from the Pacific Northwest. I have 3 cats and 2 roommates. I spend most of my free time watching and or writing about movies, TV, and wrestling and playing role-playing games. And yes, I'm very excited for this. Holly, what about you?
I am Holly Culp. I run my own business where I make and sell miniatures for dollhouses, dioramas, whatever you can do with miniatures. I live just outside of Atlanta, Georgia. I am a white cis Christian with 2 kids and way too many craft supplies. I spend most of my time crafting, watching things, crafting while watching things, child wrangling, and playing tabletop RPGs.
So I've actually always wanted to ask this. How did you get into the miniature thing?
So, I mean, it's kind of a long story, but I'll try to make it short.
No worries.
Um,
Like to tangent. We need our first tangent of this
so,
podcast. So here we go.
I used to work in childcare, and let's just say things didn't work out. I never got along with my bosses. They do really sketchy things at daycares, and I have this policy where I never lie to children. I believe that you should be able to speak to children. Now, sometimes you need to like paraphrase so that they understand things,
Hmm.
but
Yeah, I mean, that's a
I
difference.
I'm not going to straight up lie to kids, and this pissed off a lot of people that I worked for. They also wanted me to lie to the parents too, and that's yeah.
Oh,
So I got to the point where my first child was born. My husband, who has many health issues, was having serious problems with his heart. And I was like, I can't do this. Somebody has to be at home, but at the same time, I have to be making money.
right.
And so I sort of jumped without a safety net. And I was like, you know what? Things are going to work out. I am a Christian. I prayed about it. I was like, no, things are going to work out. And my grandmother used to build dollhouses and make miniatures. And one day before I left my job, I think I was doing like my 2 weeks notice at that point, I came across some YouTubers who were doing miniatures, and I was like, oh, this is like what my grandmother used to do. And I used to be really obsessed with it when I was little. And then it just kind of I got really into it, and I started, and it just grew and grew, and it started off rough for a bit,
Right.
but then I got to the point where I actually started making money, and now I have contracts with different websites that I sell to. So, yep.
That's awesome.
Cool.
So moving on to our second question. What is your history with horror? How did you get into your interest in the genre? El, what was it that got you into horror?
So it's weird. My intro to horror is actually through comedy, which I know you cannot tell from my general demeanor or tone or anything like that. It's very subtle.
Yes, very, very
But
subtle.
my father's an expat Brit. Like, they came over from England in 66, I think it was. So he's just a 6-year old running around this boat that they're on for a month and a half. because that's how you went to Australia back in the day. So, I mean, then several years later, a lot of my formative childhood viewing is that very English style of comedy, like your Monty Pythons, the Faulty Towers, the Are You Being Served, or those
Yep.
types of shows. So there's an episode of Mr. Bean where the titular Bean takes his girlfriend to the cinema, and it happens to be at a screening of A Nightmare on Elm Street, which,
Okay.
as you can predict, terrifies him to hilarious results.
Right.
Honestly, pretty good episode. Go watch it if you have the chance. But from that, I remember watching that and thinking, oh, but it can't be that scary. He's practically shitting himself. And then asking my dad about it. He's like, well, I have seen the movie, but not for a while. Do you want to watch it? And I must have been like about 5 or 6 years old at this point.
Oh no.
And yeah, the next day you go up to the old video store, rent it out on VHS, and that's basically it. That's what got me started.
Wow.
Responsible parenting.
I mean, that's a lot of people's ins to horror that I've people that I've talked to about it and listened to is like for a lot of people, I think it's oh, my parents let me watch whatever or had me watch Alien when I was like 7 or something like that.
Which I guess is, I mean, I joke, but it is technically a form of responsible parenting if you are aware of what your child is
Yes.
capable of understanding and, like, getting along with. Like, you're not going to show a 3-year old Caligula.
Right.
You could, but you shouldn't.
Yeah. And that is always an interesting thing to me because I obviously uh, look, no one knows what a kid is going to be able to handle generally in terms of media better than their parents as a rule. But my perspective on that is a little bit skewed for a couple of reasons, but notably because of the number of times I've gone to not being a parent myself, to be fair, but the number of times like I have gone to the theater and I go to see I am an adult. I will go see whatever fucked up shit I'm going to go see. And the one that is always the one that I remember the most is I went to like a Thursday night 9:30 p.m. preview of Saw. I want to say it was 7. I want to say it was Saw 7, or the final chapter if you prefer, or 3D. Anyways, it's the one where the guy from Lincoln Park gets fused into a car in the opening scene. And somebody clear like about 5 minutes in, like right in the sort of the key point of that opening scene, a baby starts crying in the movie. And I understand at a certain age you're not going to remember this, but this is like I would say somewhere between 1 and 2. It was clearly a couple who just wanted to go see the movie and couldn't or wouldn't get a babysitter, and they sat there for like 15 minutes until they finally left, and I'm like, what the fuck, for so many reasons. So like basic I don't even know where I was going with that. But
I
like
I guess exposure uh,
yeah,
at ages where it is acceptable. That's not like a fixed number because everyone
right.
is different, but where a person, even as a child, is able to understand and engage with on their terms. And that
Mhm.
could be even someone who's like, hey, look, you're not a horror fan, you're not a fan of rom com, you don't like action movies. Cool. You don't have to go see them until you want to.
Yes.
It could be, yeah, 40 years old, still, hates kids' movies. I don't know. But you're not going to force them to do it. So why are you doing it to infants?
Right. Well, more to the point being that like look everybody understands, like I said before, what their kids are going to be capable of handling, probably better than anybody else. And sometimes that's great, sometimes less so. Anyway, there's tangent two. Holly, how about you? What got you into the horror genre?
So it's kind of perfect that I'm coming off of this because, well, first of all, I sort of feel like I was basically born into this genre. I know that not everyone believes in the paranormal. I do.
Hmm.
I literally grew up in a haunted house. I had a lot of experiences as a small child and an older child, and it sort of sparked my interest in things. I wanted to know more, and I started watching this kids show in the '90s called "Are You Afraid of the Dark?"
Hmm.
And I started watching it at like age 3. And my mother noticed how into everything I was getting, and she was a big horror person. And when I was 6, one rainy Saturday afternoon, she showed me a movie called Lady in White,
Ooh.
and she knew I could handle that, and I did. I didn't have any issues with that movie,
Hmm.
and it I mean, to this day it remains one of my favorite horror movies, especially just for that experience, and that opened me up into the entire genre. Now, that said, talking about parents knowing what their kids can handle, um I watched that, and then I think shortly after, she we rented, what was it, Watcher in the Woods,
Okay.
which is like Disney's
Yes.
attempt at horror, but I loved it. And again, it's pretty good for, like, 6, 7, a good gateway. Then one night,
Oh no.
when my dad was working, I am no older than 7. She noticed that The Shining was on TV,
Oh.
and she was like, "You can handle this."
Yeah, easy.
Yeah, piece of cake.
So,
Practically the same thing.
Just a crazy man stalking a child around a hotel. No big deal.
yeah. So, she was on the phone. I remember she's like in the kitchen on the phone. I am alone in the living room at night. I am wrapped in the blanket. I think I've grabbed like my father's newspaper that he would always keep on his spot in the couch. And I've like rolled it up, and I'm just like sitting there like that. And right during the "Here's Johnny" scene,
Uh
my
huh.
father comes bursting through the door because, again, he was working late. So he
Right.
just kept, and I screamed bloody murder and started like swinging the newspaper, whatever I had in my hands, to defend myself.
That's amazing.
There was then a conversation between my parents uh, about what I was ready for and what I wasn't.
Oh, I love that.
But yeah, beyond that, like my dad, they're both big sci-fi people. He got me into Twilight Zone,
Hmm.
and eventually I did get to finish The Shining with both my parents present about a year later, I think.
Fantastic.
I just want to know if you got a couple good hits in.
No, there was honestly quite a distance from the area where he was. We had a really like long living room, so from like the couch to the area where he had come in. But I think I was more just panic swinging.
Oh wow. That might be one of my favorite horror origin stories I've ever heard. So me, unlike you two, who my parents were not and are not horror fans. My dad does like sci-fi, and I think I developed my love of sci-fi through him, but horror not at all. And so I had to kind of find it on my own. And the first thing I remember in terms of that, and I don't know if you guys ever saw these books, but there was a company called Crestwood House that put out a series of books in like the late 70s and early 80s. They're like 45 to 50 pages long. They had these orange covers, very, very sort of distinct. It's kind of their trademark. And what they would retell Universal monster stories, including pictures from the movies. So it would be stuff like Frankenstein, Wolfman, Dracula, Creature from the Black Lagoon. There was a Mad Scientists one. And I found these in my elementary school library when I was like, I want to say 6, 7. It was really early on, like just getting my start in public schooling, and I was just instantly smitten. I think the Wolfman was the first one that I found, which is one of the reasons I love werewolf horror so much now. And I devoured every single one of these books, and just completely fell in love with the genre. Again, though, my parents aren't horror fans. So they didn't let me rent horror because I was too young. I think I may have seen the Universal ones when I was younger because those are like this is early 80s. So these are 50-year-old movies at this point. Like even in the 80s, these were very, very tame. And so I would think I was able to see those, but like not anything beyond that. Instead, I ended up finding horror mostly through books, and I read Stephen King. A little Dean Koontz, not a lot of it though. I was never a huge Dean Koontz fan. I think I read The Watcher and Servants of Twilight and maybe one or two others. But I was a big reader, so I very quickly graduated from those to like Edgar Allan Poe, H.P. Lovecraft, all of that. Like when I was in, I want to say sixth grade, I was a very normal sixth grader. I did for an assign, report on somebody famous thing. I did a whole thing on H.P. Lovecraft because I think at like 13 I had already read like they had these collections of the Lovecraft books. There was a Call of Cthulhu collection. I had already read like all of those. And then I don't think I didn't see a lot of like horror on screen until like junior high, or maybe I saw a little bit at a friend's, saw some in high school, but then it was my tragically brief stint in college where I really kind of developed my film love in general. I took an elective film class just as a thing to do, and that sort of changed everything for me. I don't even think I watched any horror films at that point in the class. The main ones I remember are Harold and Maude, which is a film I still adore to this day, and All's Quiet on the Western Front are the two main ones that I remember from the class. But that got me thinking about film in a different way, and it was kind of off to the races since then. This point I started watching everything I can get my hands on, made it through the rough era of the aughts for horror, and have been it's probably been my favorite genre ever since. So yeah, that's sort of my story. So moving on from that, how would you rank your experience with the horror genre? Elle, what I think you're probably we've kind of acknowledged you're probably the freshest to the genre,
Hmm. Despite the whole age thing, because
despite the age thing. Yes.
yeah, so yeah, despite the early like head start, as it were, even though it sounds like we all kind of got into it around the same age, which is
Mm-hmm.
interesting.
Mm.
It's like movies in general just have never really been my thing. So I'm not sure what it is, but like the episodic nature of television always feels better in my mind. It's like you could take any movie, slice it up just perfectly into like TV length episodes, edit nothing else about it, and my brain enjoys that more. Not from like an attention thing, it's just it tricks it like if you were having like a meal, if you put it on a small plate or a big plate, it's hard to explain, but it's just my brain feels fuller with TV episodes.
I get that. I'm kind of the opposite, but I do get that absolutely. It makes sense.
Mhm.
And maybe because it's not exactly the thing that you put on TV as like a genre, or at least it was in Australia in the 80s and 90s. Not sure what it's like over there. It's just it then becomes less of a thing in general. So yeah,
Hmm.
you have the movies that come out that go to the general release. You have your video stores that get the ones that aren't quite popular enough, let's say, to make it to a cinema. But yeah, you're not going to sit down at 4 p.m. on a Wednesday night and go, oh yeah, let's let's watch what Friday the 13th Part 4. We'll sit through the commercials. That's fine.
Right.
Yeah, it's just I'm not sure what it is, but yeah. So my horror experience is, shall we say, limited to the point that like I legitimately think I might be able to count the number of horror movies I've seen on my fingers,
Hmm.
as long as I include my thumbs. But yeah, so it's just like I have that desire and interest, but just it's sat there in the background.
Right.
Yeah,
And that's, I think, one of the I always appreciate, like when we're talking about stuff in Slack or wherever. It's always a nice little perspective thing when you're like, oh yeah, I've heard of one of those, maybe.
I did a count one time. I looked at the IMDb top 500 movies of all time. I think I cracked double digits. I can't recall.
I mean, fair.
I mean that list also takes 6 spots for the Lord of the Rings movies. So there's 6 right there, for example. So yeah, it's not the widest range of experiences I've had for
And
whatever
that's
reason.
fine, because like to me that's exciting for me, because I'm like, oh, I can introduce you to so many things, and I'm excited to have you. Like I always say, like there are movies that I wish I could watch for the first time, and when people are like, oh, I've never seen that, I will gasp sometimes if it's a film I would not have expected, but it's a gasp in an, oh, you get to watch that movie for the first time, and I'm looking forward to hearing what you have to say about it, kind of thing.
Yeah, someone should do a podcast about that.
Yeah, someone should.
Yeah, weird.
So my experience, I would say, is if I had to rank on a 1 to 10 scale, I'd say I'm probably about an 8. There are definitely people who are more knowledgeable, more experienced, scholarly, what have you, about the genre. I have seen, I would say, most of the major horror films, go out of my way to find less known stuff. Part of that is because I try to see every film that comes out in a year. And part of that is just because I love the genre, love finding new films I haven't seen before. I don't do nearly as many rewatches as I do finding new films. I like reading about horror. I like watching horror documentaries. I love horror documentaries. I could go off for literal hours about the In Search of Darkness franchise, which is 4 films and about 20 hours worth of documentary between those four. I listen to podcasts. I like looking at films critically, hearing other people's takes, and really, horror is a very rich genre. It can do a lot of things I think that a lot of other genres can't. So, I mean, yeah, well, there are definitely, I think, people who know more than me, people who've seen films that I've never heard of. This is my favorite genre, and I like to think that I'm pretty experienced as a whole. Holly, what about you?
I'm trying to figure out where to rank myself. Definitely between the two of you.
Hmm.
Like if you're at like an 8.5, then I'm thinking I'd be around a 6 or 6.5.
Hmm.
I'm I'm at least knowledgeable to, like, if I haven't seen the movie, I probably know about it. I probably know who's in it, or I've seen clips from it or something, or it's on my list. But there are a few bigger name ones that I haven't seen yet
Right.
that I need to. I don't watch a lot of horror documentaries, which I want to change. I want to watch more of those. I do watch a decent amount of horror television as
Mhm.
well as movies.
And that's honestly that's one of my holes. I don't watch
The
a
TV.
ton of TV, mostly because I tend to focus on films more than TV. But yeah,
I mean, I started with miniseries, but
that's fair.
I like to have more of it. Which, I mean, I know some of these series, Friday the 13th, part like 30, have like so many, or, 50 remakes of
hmm
the original 7 films. But
Oh, that I mean Halloween franchise
mm,
and the Halloween continuity. That's a whole thing.
I thought I'd gotten further in that than I had in the franchise. I think I've watched about half of it. But like I was looking at it the other day and I'm like, really? Only that much?
I mean, one of them has Buster Rhymes in it.
Which one is that?
It's the one you don't want to know.
It's the one I shouldn't watch.
It's legitimately the worst of
Okay.
the series. It is 8. It's Halloween Resurrection.
Yeah, I've never seen that one.
It's real bad. It tries to play on the found footage thing a little bit, like it. Yeah, reality TV a little bit. It's just not good.
Yeah.
But yeah,
Yeah, one of the like later sort of questions. I was like, oh, I'm scraping the barrel here.
legit. That's fair.
I did get there, but ooh,
Whereas I think I know the one you're talking about, and I was like, shit, I have too many options. I have to narrow down.
Same. I was asking Austin for his opinion and then I realized who I was talking to. And he's like, which movies? He's like, oh yeah, I know what The Shining is. Wait, no. Oh, I don't know what The Shining is.
Oh
Okay.
no.
Like, oh my gosh. Who am I married to?
Let me just say, it is a goal of mine to somehow to at some point get Austin as a guest on the show, so we can have him watch something because I just want
He
to hear him talk about it.
he will have some really fun reactions.
So let's get into some nitty gritty here. And listen, one of the things I love personally about horror is the number of directions it can go and the number of subgenres there are. There are tons and tons, and some are kind of subgenres. People debate that. So the next question is, what subgenres of horror are you most a fan of? Holly, how about you? Which ones do you are your personal faves?
So the major ones for me would definitely be ghost stories. I love like because that's how I got started too. I love like traditional ghost
Right.
stories and definitely slasher. I love a good slasher and I think haunted house. I'm trying to remember every genre there was.
There's a lot.
Yeah, like haunted house, gothic horror, Lovecraftian, horror romance. I think those are all the big ones for me.
Right on. Elle, how about you?
so yeah, number one and easily without any hesitation, slashes.
Yeah,
It's like
yeah.
Mm.
typically the gorier the better, and like I've actually found recently, and I don't know why I'm surprised that my take on the world and general state of existence is kind of off from most people. So,
Mm-hmm.
which I guess also to some people's shock reflects real life as well. So, I I am aware that it's not normal and it is borderline psychopathic, but instead of being put off by like trauma or gore or even like just repelling at it, I just find it amusing.
I mean, that's fair. And there's a lot of appeal of that in slashers too.
Yes, but less so in news stories and like autopsy videos, for example.
Okay.
It's like, oh, here's uncensored footage of this guy getting absolutely run over by a truck. Like, yeah, exactly. That silence. Or it's just like a, huh.
Trying to figure out a good way to react to that.
I mean, well, look, like I definitely get it. Like that is not necessarily my thing. Not that makes it sound bad, like that's your thing. But by the same token, like I just like a week ago finished reading a book about New French extremity horror, which is some of the most visceral, disturbing, and in some cases, violent stuff that you can see. And some of those films are some of my absolute favorites. Things like Inside and Martyrs, which I don't know if we will ever cover because that depends very much on y'all. It is not a feel good movie, but like,
It's an invested buy-in.
oh, it is very much.
Mm.
All of New French Extremity is, and that's not even one of my favorite subgenres.
And then following on from that, then it's its own subgenre. So why not gore and torture?
Mm-hmm.
It's like
Mm.
it's. I think it's just the spectacle of it at that point that just makes it interesting. Then it's like some people like watching like CNC machines, like precision cut steel, or like watching an ant colony marching. Like, give me a guy getting his ribs ripped open by a chainsaw or something. That's like cool.
So Inside might be on the menu, is what I'm hearing.
As I said, I know it is borderline psychotic, but that's just my brain being weird.
There's catharsis there. I absolutely get it.
But yeah, no, that's me.
That's cool. So, I mean, listen, common thread slashers. It's the quintessential horror genre. And I think, especially when you're growing up, that's sort of what most people think of when they think of horror. And like, particularly like that was the genre for like when I was growing up and again, not really able to watch them, but I was seeing the VHS covers in the video store and being like, "Ooh, I want to see that and I hope to be able to see it someday before I die." So I do love slashers. I do love the formulaic elements of it. Like most of the time, even a bad slasher is a good slasher. Sometimes they're good because they're bad. Beyond that, I am a huge folk horror fan. I love folk horror even before I thought of it as its own genre. Stuff like The Witch, Wicker Man, Witchfinder General, Blood on Satan's Claw. Films that find horror in the dark places of the woods. Or you've got that conflict between quote unquote civilized society that has progressed and moved on. And when those elements go and come face to face with the old ways and the old gods and that sort of stuff. There's a fantastic folk horror documentary called Woodlands Dark and Days Bewitched. Again, it's like a 3-hour documentary, but it's one of my favorites just because I was watching like, yep, I need to watch this, 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 and I have seen a bunch of them and love them. Outside of that, I love, and this is sort of a new genre. A lot of people don't even really consider it as a genre, but I love good for her horror. The films where woman protagonist or anti-hero sometimes who basically looks around at the situation that they're in and says fuck it, and they do the thing that they're not supposed to do as the good girls, quote unquote, which usually ends up means that she gets bloody and things happen that are bad to the assholes around her. Stuff like, again, The Witch, Ready or Not, Audition. Carrie is very much a good for her a horror film. Jennifer's Body. This doesn't really count as, well, I count it as horror, but most people consider it more of a thriller. Gone Girl is weirdly one of my comfort watches, which again probably says a lot about me. Uh, but but yeah, you get those movies. I put a list together on Letterbox of like good for horror, just as I do a lot of rank lists on there, and I don't think other than a few stragglers, I don't think there was one below 4 stars. Like I'm into all of them. And then the last one I would say is Giallo films. I'm a big fan of Italian proto slashers that are super stylish and have really bad dubbing. And there's a killer in black gloves, and he's probably stalking a model or multiple models. And there might be some psychic element to it. Again, stuff like Tenebrae and Lucio Fulci's film, Fifth Chord, The Possessed, stuff like that. So those are sort of my, and then there are like 90,000 other subgenres that I also like, but those are the ones that I tend to gravitate towards. On the other hand, subgenres of horror that not so much a fan of. And for me, these are, I like extreme horror, but I do not like torture porn as it is traditionally referred to. That specific element of films from like the early to mid aughts in the US, Hostel, Captivity. Weirdly, I like Hostel 2 quite a bit. But like those sort of post 9/11 films, some of them do legitimately have something to say, but a lot of them were very clearly just trying to cash in just on the let's see how we can top ourselves thing without necessarily thinking them through a lot. There tends to be a whole lot of misogyny in those films, a whole lot of aughts level bro culture in those movies that just does not speak to me at all. I'm cannibal horror isn't necessarily something that I'm super into. I cannot think of a traditional cannibal horror film that I'm a big fan of. I don't like Cannibal Holocaust for a lot of reasons. The animal abuse is a big part, but just in general, it's not that appealing. Cannibal Ferox, the one that Eli Roth did, Green Inferno, I'm not a super big fan of. It just, again, there's a lot of problematic tropes in there that I don't necessarily find comfortable. And outside of some exceptions like Raw and I'm trying to think of some other ones that I might like, just not really my thing. And then creepy kid movies. Again, there's some good ones, there are some great ones, but for whatever reason, they're just I've never found myself connecting with them for whatever reason. So yeah. Holly, what about you? What are the subgenres you're not so necessarily big on?
Um, I mean, also anything like cannibalism, I think, with the exception of like Silence of the Lambs,
Yes.
Hannibal, because those are great movies.
Yes.
But beyond that, I'm not so much a fan of body horror
Okay.
or like extreme.
Mhm.
You will never get me to watch Human Centipede.
That is fair. I would never ask.
You could not pay me enough. I have seen a couple clips which haunted me for a really long time, and I will not.
That is
Um,
absolutely fair.
I think that's the major stuff. Other than that, I'm fairly open to things. I'm not so big on just the torture stuff like the Saw movies, but I'm open to watching one of them.
Mhm.
I just don't want to watch the whole series, but I'm open to watching one of them.
That's fair. Elle, how about you?
See, I'm not the biggest fan of like found footage because I think
Okay.
it makes it a little bit too hard to actually absorb the story. Where it's like, I mean, that's I guess more of a cinematic technique than a specific genre, but you know the kind of film that style would lend itself to.
Mhm.
It's like, it's yeah, I get it, but it's like at this point you're maybe just showing off. Like it's not. Is it specifically adding enough to the movie to make the camera distracting and worth it?
Yeah, no that's fair. I do love my found footage, but when it's done well.
Mm,
I actually want to watch more found footage, so
yeah.
it's
So
opposite there.
that's what I mean. This is just like from my limited experience,
Right.
stuff where I've gone. It's like, and like I looked at a list of how to categorize subgenres, and it's like art house horror. Maybe it's like the spectacle type horror that I'm a fan of doesn't tend to lend itself more to these psychological, dramatic. more mentally requiring stories.
Mm-hmm. I had a feeling that was gonna be the case with you because of
Mm,
our night house
yeah,
disagreement.
it's the payoff between like expectation and reward in my
Mm-hmm.
brain, and then finally zombie films, but not all of them. Just the ones that don't follow that like traditional Romero style.
Right.
It's like
That's the one
you
I left out.
you've basically made like angry cannibals.
Oh, you're talking about like the 28 days later.
Yeah, yeah, it's like okay, you've made it a little bit more action based. Everything's a bit more fast paced, and people are running and getting scared. Yeah, okay, sure. Is that interesting? Because like the idea of zombies to me is like they are an endless threat. They were just always still coming to get you.
Mm-hmm. No, that's legit.
So what's the difference between a zombie and you know someone at a soccer hooligan riot
Right.
at that point?
I will confess, zombies are not currently I am a little bit played out on zombies right now. Like there was something I watched for Fantasia. I do remote coverage of Fantasia each year. There was one that I did last year, and while I was watching, I was like, maybe it's time this genre gets a break because I don't think. And that's not to say that there aren't movies within zombies or really any genre that can be great. Like all it takes is one movie to come up with a new idea, and we're back, baby. But I kind of feel like everything's been done with zombies for now. Like once Walking Dead became a thing, there have been several good ones after that, but we kind of hit the like let it rest, let some other stuff come up.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can say that.
So it's sort of piggybacking off of subgenres you're not so much a fan of. L, what are your red lines in horror? Things that you're just not okay seeing.
See, that's the thing. I don't have a lot of like hard red lines on anything. Like there are things that make me uncomfortable outside of what you would expect from engaging with a piece of media.
Right.
It's like with horror movies, there's that bit of expected buy-in of, or I am going to be at least somewhat discomforted by this, and that is the goal.
Yep.
But it's like, so I'm not a fan of a jump scare. Like it just feels like a bit of a cheap reward for the filmmakers. Cool, you got me
Hmm.
to physically move. Big deal. Did you get me to care about your movie?
Right.
And
But it's not necessarily something like where you're like, oh, there's a jump scare in it. I'm not watching it, kind of
no,
thing.
exactly. It's
Yeah.
only going to be like if it's, oh yeah, this movie's so scary. It's nothing but jump scares. Like, ugh.
Right. Yeah.
It's
That's
like
fair.
give me something else to engage with.
Yep.
But also like I have claustrophobia, nyctophobia, and a bit of arachnophobia. So depending on how those are presented in movies, I could get super uncomfortable with them. But so far, not to the point that I will not watch a movie or I will turn it off.
Right.
Like I literally watched Arachnophobia, and it's like I was uncomfortable the whole time, but I still watched it.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah, it's like again, rip someone's heart out of their chest and like poke them in the eyes with it or something. That's fine. Put someone in a hallway that is framed in the camera just too tightly, and like, ooh,
Yeah. Yeah. I can see that.
other than that, it's like, yeah, I don't think I've seen enough, or at least even have the education about what's even out there to know what I wouldn't react to well. But I think that it would be hard to find a definitive red line for me.
Right. Well, we'll figure it out as it goes along. So, Holly, I know you kind of touched on these, I think, in the ones you're not so much a fan of,
Yeah.
but what about you?
Extreme torture,
Hmm.
definitely.
Takes martyrs off the table. Uh,
Sorry.
No, no, it's fine. Martyrs is a film that, listen, I adore it. I think is an incredibly meaningful film that says a lot about the world we live in and religion and a bunch of other really interesting things. It is not a film I would ever recommend without a ton of caveats to somebody because it is
Mm.
not comfortable.
That what was that? Martyrs, was it? I'm just
Martyrs,
making my own
yes.
list to watch
That's
afterwards,
that's fair. That's fair.
just so I can skip all the talking bits, all the boring parts, and just get to the good stuff.
To be clear, if you're gonna watch it, make sure you watch the French one, not the American one, because the American one is the French one neutered, completely
Fair,
neutered.
good to know.
But yeah. Anyways, sorry, Holly.
No, you're good. I think the other one would be like animal cruelty.
Mm-hmm.
Is a big one. I really don't like anything. I don't like anything that has to deal with like killing babies.
Okay,
Is another really big one for me.
that's fair.
And I think that that's about it. Those are the
How about
hardcore.
kids though?
I mean, it depends. Is the child obsessed or possessed by a demon?
I mean, sometimes maybe, sometimes not.
I've seen some with kids,
Okay.
and I mean, so, yeah, sometimes it gets to me, sometimes it doesn't.
Like, okay,
It,
here's I think a good judgment. Have you ever seen The Ruins?
no, I haven't.
Okay. So a kid dies in it, and it's the movie itself is actually pretty good. It's a bunch of American tourists go to this pyramid in they're on vacation in Mexico. They go to this out of the way pyramid that's covered with vines, and the vines end up being a problem. But they get on the pyramid. When they go to leave, the villagers will not let them leave, and one of the Americans starts freaking out about the situation and just because it's something to grab, grabs some of the vines and throws it, and it hits one of the kids, who's probably, I would say, 10, somewhere around
No,
there.
I'm okay with that sort of thing.
Cool.
It's mainly like babies or like newborn babies, and yeah, stuff like that.
For me, I don't have red lines. Like again, I've watched Inside. I have not yet watched Irreversible. It's on my list of things to watch. I have a phobia of clowns, but I watched the It movies because I it's really hard at this point for movies to really for horror films to really scare me. That one scared me, and I got reminded of like what that feeling is like. I watched it through my fingers, but I watched it. The only thing that I would say in terms of I will not watch a Serbian film, which is not saying I will not. For people who aren't aware, I'm not saying I won't watch films from Serbia. There is a movie called A Serbian Film. I know what's in it. It is an extreme, like, taboo crossing in the worst fucking ways. I know I know the plot. It's one of these ones that edge lords tend to put on the oh, you think you've seen extreme stuff, but have you seen this kind of thing? And I know what's in it. I am not interested in watching that. And I don't even recommend looking up what's in it because it's that kind of fucked up of a movie. Outside of that, I'll watch fucking anything. So moving on from red lines, what is in your mind your biggest hole in your horror watch list? And what films are you most looking forward to watching or talking about for this podcast? Elle, what's yours?
So, legitimately, I saw a meme the other day where the text was, and I quote, "Have you seen?" No, I haven't. I've watched 6 films in my entire life and finished 2 shows. I don't understand the reference and I don't know who that actor is. So, my answer is pretty basic. The biggest hole in my watch list is any film that's ever been made, and I am most looking forward to seeing, like Marlon Brando once said when asked what he's rebelling against, "What do you got?"
Yeah, that is totally fair. I'm excited for being able to talk over some of these films with you too, because again, it's stuff that I've seen and been aware of for a long, long time. I'm excited to see what you think about both of you think about
Mm.
a lot of the films, just in general, talking about them, but knowing that I have a clean slate to work with. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, like I've mentioned to you mentioned this to you before. It's like if you like told me that you'd had double master's doctorate in like media studies or like film analysis, it's like yeah, no, that sounds fine. That makes perfect sense. But it's like I don't have any of that background to it, so a lot of my analysis is at the level of I liked it or well, I didn't like that.
Mm-hmm.
It's like okay, why? But then like hearing you talk on other subjects where it's just like wow, you know so much about stuff. I am so jealous. But not even knowing it, just being able to articulate things.
To be fair, I've seen your letterboxd reviews. You know more than you're saying.
Like, this is a little bit of a put on, but yeah.
Yeah, yeah, yeah. I'm excited for that. Holly, how about you? What are your holes and what are you looking forward to?
So, I mean, as I've said before, I'm fairly familiar. Like, even if I haven't like seen something, I'm familiar with a lot of things.
Mm-hmm.
There are a couple movies that I think of like major horror movies that I haven't seen. What one of which is like Texas Chainsaw Massacre.
Good news.
Yeah. Another would be like I'm almost embarrassed to say I've never seen Children of the Corn.
Okay, okay.
So I'm trying. There are a couple others like that, especially I think like '80s bigger ones that I am just embarrassed to say I haven't seen. Those are the ones off the top of my head that I can think of. I know there are others.
So, like the kind of ones that if you walked up to Johnny movies on the street, it's like, hey, name a horror movie that isn't a slasher. The
Yeah,
chances are that you'd get one of those, and that's
Right.
like, yep, no, that fits those that criteria.
I'd only just watched the Halloween movies about 3 or 4 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
So, like, I'm trying to catch up, and I'm trying to remember what was it I watched last October. Oh, yes, I hadn't seen Friday the 13th. And so, yeah, I watched several of those last
Right on.
October. So, like every October definitely I try to catch up on something like that.
Yep. And what are you looking forward to watching or talking about or
I mean, really, like I think I just said like just the major ones that I feel like I should have seen: Texas Chainsaw Massacre, and yeah, just those. I can finally be like, yeah, I've actually seen those. So
So, like the quote obvious names, where it's like, oh, now I understand the references that everyone's making about
yes,
this. It's like,
yes,
oh,
Yep.
I get that Simpsons parody now.
Yes.
Things
yeah,
like that. Yeah.
exactly.
So for me, it's when I went into Letterboxd, I was like, all right, what are the really popular horror films, and filter out the ones that I've watched. There are holes, and there are things that I'm haven't seen. The ones that I sort of focused on, though, I've never seen One Cut of the Dead, which I know is a zombie film. It's a little bit more of a comedy. I don't know that I might just see that on my own because I don't know how much it will. We have a lot to cover. This is a little bit, I wouldn't call it obscure because it's newer, but I think a lot of people don't necessarily think of it as horror. I've seen all of Robert Eggers' movies except The Lighthouse, which was, there is, my understanding is that there is uh, a little bit of cosmic stuff in there. I don't, again, I've tried to stay spoiler free on it because I never got around to watching it. One that is, I'd say it fits in the slasher genre from what I'm aware. I've never seen Wolf Creek, which is one that always I hear people say is one of the better from the aughts, like from the post Scream die down before the genre sort of revived, really not that long ago. And then just because it's a bonkers film, there is a Japanese film called Hausu that is just strange, bizarre. It's one that pops up again on a lot of all-time great horror lists that I've just never gotten around to. In terms of ones that I'm most excited to cover, I mean, I would say there's a lot. The big ones would be. we've talked I think a lot off mic, and in two cases on mic on another podcast you should be checking out called Check This Out. The other Scream films, because that is legitimately one of my favorite franchises.
Mine too.
And I just want to talk about those films for the rest of eternity. So that's a big one. I am really interested, and I want you to both see. I saw the TV Glow, which was my pick for the third best film of last year, behind only The Substance and Red Rooms. The original Suspiria, I would love to cover and talk about because I think that is a gorgeous, wild introduction to Italian horror. Elle, I think there's a slight possibility you might have actually seen this one because I know that you're a big fan of anime and manga, but Perfect Blue,
I have heard of it, but I have not watched it,
okay.
which is a step up from a lot of things that have been said in the last, what, 5 minutes?
And it is a psychological thriller slash horror in anime form that has a lot to say, including now, about stan culture and idol culture over in Japan and identity. Blair Witch, I would love to cover. And finally, Wicker Man, I think I just rewatched it for the first time in forever, literally last night, and was reminded how amazing of a movie that is for so many reasons. To be clear, I am talking about the 1973 version. I'm not talking about Nicolas Cage, The Bees. Oh my God, The
I was
Bees
about
one.
to ask. I'm like, I don't want to sit through that again. Okay.
Listen, the Nicolas Cage one, if you view it as an unintentional comedy, great, but it is not for me. No, the original one is it's a very weird film in that like the first half of it is kind of almost like you're wondering if you're watching a folk concert, but it has a lot of amazing things to say about sort of how we view superstition and religion. It's just a gorgeous movie as well. So that's another one that I'm looking forward to talking about. And for our final question, because we need to talk about, well, we've been talking about films kind of already, but what are your top five horror films? And somewhat briefly, why? And Elle, why don't you? Because I assume this is where you're talking about you were kind of scraping the barrel,
Mm-hmm. It's like, how many movies have I ever seen in my life now that someone's asked me to rank them? Oh boy.
and you don't have to rank. Just like what are they?
No, but I mean, it's that kind of mental paralysis. It's like, oh, what's your favorite thing? It's like, I have never seen anything in my life. I emerged from my robot cocoon this morning.
Right.
It's like that. Just everything goes out of the window. Yeah. So I guess the first one, Nightmare on Elm Street, the original one.
Mm-hmm.
It's like it's just so foundational to my influences and interests, despite
Yep.
having things or circumstances that hold me back from having interests. Uh, Number two, Jason X. It is
Yes.
it is so cheesy that it's almost a comedy without even being a horror movie, but it still is. It knows what it wants to do and does not give two shits about if you like it or not. It's doing it anyway.
And has one of the best kills in the franchise.
Mm-hmm.
I've never seen that one.
Oh, it is nonsense, but it is so much fun
Okay.
nonsense.
It is glorious.
Yep.
Number three, Critters 2.
Okay.
Legitimately gave me nightmares as a kid for the weirdest reasons and changed my sleeping habits in such a way that I broke two beds.
Wow. Funny enough, you've got one that I haven't seen because I've seen Critters, but I have not seen Critters 2.
It is more in line with my type of movie, let's say.
That's fair. That's fair. I
Uh,
like Critters.
yeah. Number four, Battle Royale. It's
Ooh.
the Japanese one and not the Hunger Games and not the one that Stone Cold Steve Austin's in, the Condemned or whatever it is. It's like, yeah,
Yes.
Battle Royale. Just, it's Battle Royale. It's gore and horror that's equally understated in a way that I can appreciate without being like so gratuitous. And I still don't know if it was any better in the moment than the Royal Rumble that I was trying to watch instead, but I'm a stupid kid. But I think it probably was. Would have been about 2002 when I was homesick, and it's like, oh, what's on? Royal Rumble's on. Okay. No, that's Battle Royale. Same thing.
That's amazing.
And number five, this is one I am actually like honestly passionate about. Patchwork.
Patchwork.
It's a weirdly plural positive movie in a way, and it's so cool to see how it's put together cinematically, which is ironic given the title and plot of the film, but still. Yeah, clever editing and a soundtrack that I had legitimately on loop for 3.5 months straight.
I think I've heard of it. I've never seen it.
It is real good.
Nice.
But yeah, that's my five.
Fair. Holly, how about you?
I have gone back and forth and back and forth on this one. I felt bad because I feel like I have so many of like the obvious choices on mine.
I mean, we're talking about the top five. These are going to be obvious.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, Austin, that's what Austin had said. He was like, he said as long as you've got one that like maybe wouldn't be people's obvious choice.
Yep.
And this is when I was running things by him, and I can't remember what movie he confused The Shining with, but he confused it with another movie.
The original Batman.
Um, no, no, but yeah. So yeah, The Shining is on my
Okay.
list
Yeah.
definitely. I mean, some of this is also from like my experiences with them. It's like
Absolutely.
I'm not gonna have an experience like that and not put it on there. And as terrified as I was, I did want to finish the movie.
Mm-hmm.
So I couldn't not. I mean, I had nightmares for not finishing it.
Yep.
Lady in White, as I've said before, that one will always be in my top five.
Nice.
And I mean, that's in part, it was a really big part of my childhood. We terrorized the neighborhood with it. My mother and I, we showed everyone in the neighborhood the movie at some point or another. And it's also those memories, like with my mom showing it to me, that
Right.
I definitely, that will be up there. The original Scream.
Mm-hmm.
And I went back and forth on if it would be the first Scream or the second one, but I am kind of completely in love with the character of Stu, and I have to do the original.
Fair.
Beyond that, the original Halloween,
Mm-hmm.
because I feel like it was just the beginning of a lot.
Yep.
And oh my gosh, I've gone back and forth on the final one. I think I'm gonna go with Silence of the Lambs on that one. Because also it might be like the only horror film that my husband's familiar with.
I. There you go. It is a brilliant movie. That's another one that I watched. I think it was late last year. Did a rewatch.
That's the one we might be able to get Austin on. He
Nice.
he hasn't seen the whole thing. He's seen scenes from it, but we might be able to get him on that one.
Right on.
So we pivot from the popular obvious choices to obscurity hour.
No, no. These are mostly. I mean, we have some repeats.
Yeah.
So my top five, and I did go back and forth on this a lot. Like initially, I was like, all right, let me just write down all the ones, and then I started off with like 15, and then I had to narrow that down. Ultimately, my top five, I do have Halloween on my list. I think it is. It's almost not almost. It's a perfect slasher film. Not
Mm-hmm.
just because it started the okay, technically Black Christmas is the original true slasher film, but Halloween was the one that sort of codified all of the elements that would be followed by everything else. And then it was the film that inspired Friday the 13th directly. And so we have a slasher genre because of Halloween.
Yeah. I mean, the clear answer there is I've heard of Halloween. Haven't heard of Black Christmas.
Yeah, that's oh, Black Christmas. We are gonna have to cover Black Christmas. It's so good. I put Scream 2 on the list
I knew you would.
because for me, the difference between them is like a sheet of paper. But for me, Scream 2 is able to, because with the Scream films, we're not following, it's not like Halloween or Friday the 13th or Nightmare on Elm Street, where we're following the killer. We're following the survivors. They are the narrative through line of the franchise. So we are able to get deeper into the characters of Sydney and Randy and Gail and Dewey, and we don't have to do as much setup. So to me, it is just a slightly by inches better film. And I think it has arguably the best killer reveal in the franchise. My next one, and I will preface this by saying Roman Polanski can fuck off and die in a fire, but Rosemary's Baby is, again, kind of a perfect film for its sort of demonic, evil baby, satanic cult subgenre. It is a film about, ironic considering who it comes from, but it is a film about gaslighting women and just everything that comes in that. The performances are pretty much perfect. It is, there's some wild elements in it. The ending is iconic. It's just, the score is amazing. As much as I cannot stand that man, that movie is pretty much perfect. Next one, again, fuck Joss Whedon, but he didn't direct this, he just co-wrote it. Cabin in the Woods,
That almost made it on my list. That was like number 6.
which is the perfect meta horror film. It's funny, it's very, very smart and very clever without being pretentious about it. Yes, it's clever. Yes, it kind of knows it is, but it also knows that it needs to be a fun, engaging horror film and not stick up its nose in the air at the genre. While
Mm-hmm.
it does sort of gently satirize parts. And most of the protagonist characters are just some of my all-time favorite characters in horror. And then the final one would be The Exorcist, which
Mm.
is, The Exorcist is the first horror film that I watched after I had sort of started examining films in a critical way, and that was really revelatory to me in terms of what you can do with the genre and the things that you can say. And I know it's controversial. I would argue that it is a very pro religion movie in a lot of ways. Some of the most iconic moments in horror, period. And I can watch that movie over and over and find something new in it every time. So those are my five.
Yeah, fun fact about The Exorcist, Mike Oldfield's Tubular Bells is basically the first, quote, real song that I ever learnt to play on piano. And one of the ways people could identify that I could just play music by ear at like age 4.
Oh, wow, nice.
The first one was because technically it's obviously it's a real song, but it's not a real song. Suicide is Painless, the MASH theme song, legit, like first keyboard like as a kid, and it's like just banging that out of nowhere, and they're like, huh, and then yeah, Tubular Bells.
Yeah, that's really impressive. And I forgot that that was the title of the MASH theme song.
Mm-hmm.
As did I.
Suicide is Painless brings on many changes, but I can take or leave it if you please.
Yeah.
Are the actual lyrics,
Yep.
and it was a writing contest.
Amazing. So, yeah, that is us. That is who we are and sort of where we're coming from in terms of horror.
So what have we got on the slate coming up?
So, next episode, we will be jumping into actually covering films. And as kind of was teased when we were talking about stuff, we're going to cover a big one. We are going to cover one I'm personally very excited to talk about, which is the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. It is, I mean, it's, again, iconic horror.
I'm so glad you actually said a horror movie because I'd forgotten and I was going to say basketball.
I mean, something about horror. I won't go there. But yeah, that is us. You can find us at whatever podcatcher you prefer. You can find us on Blue Sky and Instagram at Final Ghouls Pod. Meanwhile, you can find me at JThomas411 Mania on Blue Sky and Letterbox.
I'm available on Mastodon at shards at kind.social and also Shard System on Letterbox.
And you can find me, Hollycope on Blue Sky, or Miniature Magic 18 on Instagram.
And you can also find all of us playing role playing games at Final Show Films on Twitch and YouTube.
And today's horror movie survival tip: if the house you're living in tells you to go away, just do it.